for him. Oh, come on, man. Blacks and Mexicans voted more and Hispanics voted more for him than Romney. Romney was the ultimate white boy, wasn't he? I'm here in a town where I know powerful female Hispanics that love Trump. So, research, people, or shush. You know, I don't talk about things. I'll give you a great example. I played in a band a couple of times in my life because my friends were tolerant enough to let someone who didn't take it as seriously as he should still play in the band. I played bass guitar. I wasn't very good. Did I try my hardest at every practice? Absolutely. But outside of practice, I almost never picked up the bass.
Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 2919 East Broadway. This is a special edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you live on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live, download our free app, and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. And we can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. So I can interview characters and people that were as important as the musicians in creating a warm sound that expanded people's ears in a sonic fashion. I connected with this cat on social new media several years ago. I believe he's been following my work pretty well, and it's really an honor to welcome in Val Garay. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake. Welcome. Glad to be here.
It's great to talk to you, man. I wanted to go back for a minute and just talk to you about when I talked to Cooch Korchmar a couple years ago. I was, sort of like into this whole thing that it's all about analog versus digital. One of the reasons you listen to albums like the Mamas and Papas, Seals and Crofts, a lot of this stuff. It sounds so warm. And actually, Cooch said it's less about that than it is about mic placement. And I wanted you to talk specifically about your ability to, your mic placement, how you learn to place mics around, especially the rhythm section, specifically the drums and the bass.
Well, when I started out years ago at the Sound Factory, I worked with a wonderful engineer, Dave Hassinger, who was kind of a pioneer in rock and roll in that he did all the early Rolling Stones records when he was a staff engineer at RCA, which most people felt that all those records were made in England, but they were all done at RCA Studios in Hollywood. He did Satisfaction, Under My Thumb, 19th Nervous Breakdown, Get Off My Cloud, all the classic ones. And so he left RCA because he got let go for moonlighting as a producer and had a hit record with a band on Warner Brothers. And so he took the money he made from that and he bought the Sound Factory in Hollywood. And that's where I first started trying to produce records and working with him as an engineer, and realized that wasn't going to work. So I ended up taking a job with him because he talked to me one day and said, "You have great ears. Why don't you come to work for me?" So I did. So I started my $100 a week planning to get sandwiches job. And a year later, I had recorded and mixed my first hit as an engineer. So having a background with a guy who'd done not only Sam Cooke and the Rolling Stones and the Jefferson Airplane and all these amazing acts, he did a lot of big band stuff. And so I got a very broad stroke of how to mic probably everything imaginable, from a drum set to a French horn. And in doing that, you learn mic techniques that today, because kids pretty much build and record and do everything on laptops in their house or their bedroom,
right,
for the most part,
right,
there's no training. There's no background. So miking techniques and people that teach you those things, people like me can do that, but I don't do a lot of teaching. I do seminars from time to time around the country, but most of the time that kind of stuff doesn't get passed down. So all the younger kids in the digital world, as it were, don't really understand, the meaning of great mic preamps and great microphones, and they don't have the budgets. I record all my singers still on a Neumann U67 tube mic, and I just realized the other day I looked at online, and those things are selling for like $18,000.
My gosh.
I think I paid like $1,500 for it new. So
yeah, I mean,
I think
yeah,
that's
go ahead.
I think that's kind of what the state of the art is. It was always about the front end of a console, how good the front end was and the preamps, and that's why most people never recorded on SSLs, because the front ends weren't very good. They always recorded on needs or APIs. And miking was the other part of it. I can remember doing an album with Linda Ronstadt years ago called Prisoner in Disguise, and I decided that I was not going to use any bottom EQ on any instrument throughout making the entire record. I was going to do it with mic placement. So if you go back and listen to that record, the bottom end is all natural. There's no bass added to any instrument or any microphone.
Can you explain to younger cats listening all over the world why you did that?
Yeah, because I wanted to do an album where I could create the bass end of anything based on mic placement. And it took longer and it was a lot more work, but it can be done. And, it's so easy to reach for an equalizer and add 200 cycles or 400 or whatever you want. And today when I watch kids work, with plugins, because I'm constantly doing stuff when I'm mixing records for people. I'm constantly, developing products for Waves, for API, for, Apogee, all these companies. And I'm constantly comparing them to the old school hardware stuff. And I would say 99% of the time the old school hardware stuff beats the plug-in because it's warmer and bigger, and they're using things that are algorithms. So there is a difference. And, it's also about the cost. I mean, I used to use 5 Telefunk and 251s on drum mics. I used 2 for overheads and 3 for tom-toms. Well, it's $15,000 a copy. That's $75,000 worth of microphones today. That's why all these companies are desperately trying to create these microphones that emulate the classic microphones. And I think so far the closest to all of them is Stephen Slate, who I do a lot of beta work with as well. He's got a mic out now that was on the cover of Sound on Sound magazine this last month. That's a mic emulation that, with the exception of the 67, because I compared that as well, they get really close. It's amazing.
Talking to Val Garay here on the Jake Feinberg Show. Val, just you're kind of coming in and out a little bit, so just speak as close as you can to the earphone, to the mic. But I wanted to talk to you about authenticity. I mean, Emil Richards, I'm sure you've done some work with him in the studios over time. The percussionist,
Yes.
So it's like, I was at his house in Toluca Lake a few years back, and he's like, you got a singer now, and they sing a song, and they yell upstairs to the engineer, "How'd I sound?" And the engineer said, "Oh, terrible, but don't worry, we can fix it." I mean,
I know, but that's the common joke. You do a take. How is it? Sucks. Come on in.
Let me ask you. But I mean, let's juxtapose that to working with these seminal artists. I'm just trying to get at authenticity and the idea that these guys were craftsmen, and you didn't have the Pro Tools and the computers to fix all this stuff. So are we dealing with, is one reason there's sort of this, not just the sterile sound in the music, but also in the fact that really what you're not even really hearing who this person truly is, and they don't really have the chops to either sing or play?
I find it, I'm sure there's a percentage of music made today in that fashion. I find it hard to believe that somebody like Christina Aguilera, who's a modern singer, is not a great voice. She is a great voice. There's a lot of great voices in popular music today that can sing their ass off. The pitch correction thing, if you're a great singer, I doubt seriously they do a lot of pitch correction on Adele. There's probably a note or two here and there where they have to tweak it, because today when I listen to vocalists, perform, and I'm producing something, I listen for performance. Before, I used to have to listen for performance and pitch. So if they sing a phrase great and it's a little out of tune, it's easy to fix, and it just saves an immeasurable amount of time. It doesn't mean they're any less of an artist, doesn't mean they're any less of a singer. I think the cookie cutter syndrome comes from, if you listen to all these pop hits right now, they're probably written, produced by probably the same 10 people, Bruno Mars versus, Dr. Luke versus whoever. And they all kind of use the same samples. They all kind of use the same programs. And so that's where the similarity and the cookie cutterness comes from. When you listen to records that were made years ago, and I'll give you an example, I was doing a Motels record, and I cut a song with her called Only the Lonely, and she did this great yodel at the end of the song on take number 6. Well, and take number 2 was the take I used, so it took me 2 days to fly that lick in, trying to line up 2 tape machines and get them to lock up so that you could fly that in. That would be a cut and paste in 3 seconds. So that's where the thing has gotten a lot easier. In terms of the artistic angle and credibility as a singer, like I said, there's singers that you can't discount their vocal ability. And then I'm sure there's singers that are, kind of marginal that they can pump up. The problem is that there is zero, and I say zero, dynamic range in any records made today. Everything has to be loud.
Key. You nailed it.
Yeah.
No how did we get from a point of understanding dynamic range?
Well, because I think people started to believe that louder wins. So I'll give you an example. In my studio, when I'm mixing stuff, because everything I mix is in Pro Tools, but I go through a Manley Variable Mu, which is a 16-tube stereo compressor that I run all the mixes through, so it warms everything up. I use all analog front-end stuff, all API and BAE and Avitas preamp, mic pre's, and it's all high-end front-end stuff. When you get to the point where you're mixing something, the dynamic range used to be on a standard +4 VU meter, you'd get up to zeros and +1s. Now I have a button on my VU meters that I push in and it drops them 20 dB, and now I hit those zeros 20 dB hotter than it was 15 years ago. So that's how much louder things are recorded. And then when you master it, they make it even louder. So it's crazy, but if you look at the waveform of the files,
right,
they're like flat tops. They're buzz cut. There's very little light between the outer edges and the center mass because they're just compressed and recompressed. And then they go to radio, and they have 3-band compression, which flattens it out even more. It's crazy.
When you were the engineer on Seals and Cross Summer Breeze, is that correct?
Yes.
So it was Wilton Felder had just picked up the electric bass, but was he just playing out of an amp? I mean, I guess what I'm also getting at is I think you nailed it. I think loud wins now, but that song, I mean, the Studio Cats cooked the groove on that, but it wasn't it wasn't overpowering the vocals. I mean, what were the Cats? How much were you involved in? Can you talk about that section? That session or one of those sessions. Was it less is more? Was there only a few mics over there?
No, it had nothing to do with that. It had to do with when you had a rhythm section with players like that. Those guys were basically, the Jazz Crusaders gone studio musicians. It was Wilton Felder on bass,
right,
and Joe Sample playing keyboards,
right,
and Louis Shelton was playing guitars, and we were there. You had to create things because if you remember the song, there's a lick in the song that goes do 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 do, and it's done with a guitar. But then we needed something more interesting, so we picked up a little tiny toy piano that's about 12 inches wide that little kids play that has this funny little chimey sound, and played that on it. And then that sounded a little fake, so then we took the Steinway and I put masking tape on the strings, and they doubled it with that, and that's where that sound came from. Well, you had to create those things. Today, there's a trillion plugins that you can use and effects that just create stuff that's, like crazy. We just have to create it with a cardboard box and try to mic it in a way that it would sound interesting, like I did in Traffic Jam with James Taylor and Russ playing drums, and we didn't want to use a drum set, so we used a tape box, and I taped the kick drum pedal to the floor and set the tape box up as a kick drum.
I want you. Yeah,
sound.
you know what? I could talk to you. Or I'd like you to tell me to me, because a lot of people, because we have a saturation of information. Whether you're a musician and you are seeking, or in your position as an engineer or a producer, audio production, can you just? I think that this is so invigorating. Can you just talk about one of these times where you had to basically indigenously create something to get a sound, as opposed to just using a plug-in?
Well, like I just said,
you gave two examples. I'm just saying, like, I want
tape box.
I want to hear more. I want to know how I also want to know how flexible the musicians were, where you would put them in this position, but they weren't. It didn't throw them off their game.
No, everybody was always looking for something different, and they weren't opposed to trying anything, really. I mean, when I think of Russ and Lee and Danny and, all those James Taylor sessions we did, I mean, I remember Danny and James sitting in the side room at the Sound Factory. The control room was on the right side, had a room that was isolation, and then the room in front. And I remember them sitting in there sort of just jamming. James was all set up because we were tracking some song. I don't remember what we were tracking, but he was sitting there with an acoustic guitar, and Danny was, and they started playing Handyman. And I'm listening to them over the mics, and Peter and I looked at each other, and we went, holy shit, that's such a great idea. We go running out and go, oh, my God, you guys got to do that. And they went, James goes, I'm not cutting another oldie. So that's where that started, and that took 2 days. You got to do this.
You pushed them, and they finally did it.
And eventually they did it. But it's funny, people's reactions to things.
How did you? I'm blown away. How did you connect with the Mizell Brothers?
Well, that's an interesting story. Freddie and Fonz Fonz was signed to Motown as a producer with what's his name? They did a lot of the Jackson 5 stuff together. They were the corporation. Freddie Parent.
Yeah.
Fonz and Freddie were signed to Motown as producers and writers, and they were working on the Jackson 5 stuff. And Larry was sort of out there on his own. And Larry and Fonz had both graduated from Howard University in Washington, D.C., which is kind of like the black version of Juilliard. Donald Byrd was a teacher at Howard.
No, I know the backstory is incredible. I cannot believe.
Well, Donald Byrd kind of godfathered them and brought them out to California, and got them signed to Berry Gordy. He got Fonz signed to Berry Gordy, and Larry was sort of floating around. And so I started doing, at Donald's request, Donald's jazz records for Blue Note. I did 3 of them with, Harvey Mason and all those guys. It was the beginning of that whole jazz fusion thing. And then Donald came to me and he said, listen, I got these kids at Howard that are graduating this year that I want to make a group out of them and call them the Blackbirds. And I said, great. So they brought them out to California, and we recorded an album, and none of them sang. So Larry Fonz and this guy, Larry Zagidi, and myself all went in the vocal booth and sang Walking in Rhythm.
Get out. That's you on that?
It's me. Larry Fonz,
this is why I do my show. This is why I do my show, Garay. Unbelievable.
So then we finished that, and that became a big hit, and then they were kind of Sound Factoryized with me. So then Larry came and said, listen, I want to do Taste of Honey. And so then we did Taste of Honey, and I worked with them for 5 years. And then I left the Sound Factory at that point because I'd built Record One. And so that's at that point I stopped working with them.
So, I mean, this is. Can you talk about even with the Donald Byrd? I see here George Butler produced a couple of his other there's a couple of albums where Ed Green, they're just like, I mean, were you the type of guy there that where you'd say just start up a groove, start up a jam, and
well, no, I'll tell you, I met Eddie Green when I used to do demos at the studio in Torrance. I can't think of the name of the studio now, but I used to cut demos there. Guy would give me free studio time, and I used Eddie Green on a lot of the demos that I was working on at the time. Eddie Green was probably the first drummer I ever worked with that was a rhythm machine. I mean, the guy was like, you could clock him with a stopwatch, and every beat was exactly the same distance apart. I mean, the guy was like a drum machine. I'd never heard anybody play like that. And that's the reason he did so many of those dates with Gene Page and Motown, because he just, when he played a groove, it was relentless, you know?
But it didn't sound like a machine, though. It was just because he really has a unique.
Well, it didn't sound like a machine, but he played like one. You know what I mean? I mean, the rhythm, his time was just impeccable, and he had the greatest feel because he would hit his kick drum in perfect time, and his snare drum was as late as it could be without being late. And that's what made him feel so good all the time.
Why are you just waxing poetic? Why also on All Music Guide is it gives you credit for engineering and remixing, but not three-part harmonies? I mean, you need that.
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea.
So
that was
can you
just
tell?
Funny days when we used to do stuff. You know, when you had to get something done, and how did you do it? I mean, none of the kids in the Blackbirds sang. You know.
Well, I mean, I've interviewed Kilgo. I interviewed Kevin Toney and Donald Byrd.
Kevin, yeah.
Kevin.
I remember Kevin.
Kevin, yeah. And I'm looking at this, and I'm just thinking to myself, this is, I mean, stepping into tomorrow. That's that album. I mean, those albums. It was this. I guess if you could talk to the audience about, from a musical point of view, what the Mizells brought in, because it seemed like it was a fusing of jazz, funk, funk was not, I guess, was just beginning to become part of the lexicon. I mean, people used to say, let's play funky blues. They didn't say funk, but it was that symphonic strings and vocals. I mean, can you talk about how they were adding to the vocabulary of music at that time?
Well, they created a genre. I mean, that's why I said they started doing the jazz albums with Donald. I mean, they were the beginning of the whole jazz fusion movement. They were responsible for that with Donald. Donald created that, you know, and they just had that sense about their, you know, music and production that was just amazing. What was really crazy for me was I'm doing those guys in the evening, and in the afternoon I'm doing the Four Seasons, you know, December '63, oh what a night, and the week before that I'm doing J.D. Souther's solo record.
Unbelievable, man.
And the week before that I'm doing, you know, Neil Diamond. It was crazy, you know. And Marvin Gaye. I did the Trouble Man record with him.
I just saw that record this morning. This is, I mean, so this is mind blowing to me. You talk about, I mean, I love these cats so much. Can you talk about the funniest experience you had working with Sklar and Kunkel? I mean, those guys were they're mensches in so many ways. They're decent guys, and yet, you know, and they are, because of their reputations, they're off touring prodigiously with these guys now on the road, and but they were. I mean, was it the type of thing where you would see Sklar and Kunkel, and then it would be Ron Tutt, and then it might be David Kemper, and then it might, I mean, Ed Green. I mean, how many different drummers would you see in one day? Or would it just be Kunkel all day?
You know, it depended on the project. See, like if I was doing James Taylor, it'd be Kunkel every day. If I was doing just session dates, Gene Page would bring in Gene Pello, then he'd bring in Ed Green, then he'd bring in Ron Tutt, then he'd bring in
Earl Palmer.
I mean, it was just I got to work with the greatest drummers and players in the history of the business, you know. Just that time, right time of the, you know, being at the right place at the right time. The Sound Factory had signed a deal with Motown because when they moved here from Detroit, they didn't have the studio. So they signed a 3-year deal. We tracked all the Motown records for 3 years at the Sound Factory. So that was one of the clients that I had.
Wow. So this is fascinating to me. So you were literally in the pocket when Motown moved to the West
Oh
Coast.
yeah, well I do 3 sessions a day, 10 to 1, 2 to 5, with Gene Page, and it was Bobby Humphreys on percussion, or no,
Bobby Hall.
Yeah, Bobby Hall on percussion, and Joe Sample on keyboards, and then the guitars were Ray Parker, Larry Carlton, Dean Parks, Wawa Watson, and what was the other guy who I used to love?
I should know this too. It'll come to me.
But there was like five first call guitar players that were always there. Gary Coleman would play percussion. Bobby Hall would play percussion. Wilton would play bass. It was this amazing rhythm section that just they could play anything.
Can you talk a little bit about a current project or an inspirational project you've had this in 2016?
Well, I'm working right now on a couple of things. I'm working right now with a singer-songwriter who came to me through my dear friend John Barrick. And John Barrick is a world-renowned manager who is Irving Azoff's partner for all these years, and John still manages Journey and REO and all these bands. And this girl was a struggling singer-songwriter, and her father met Irving because her father's a famous golf teacher. His name is Dean Rymuth. He coached Mickelson's first 15 years of his career. So he got to Irving because Irving's a golfer, and Irving set her up with Rock Mafia. So she was in Rock Mafia through 3 years of college that she was going to, and she got a good background in songwriting. And then they brought her to me and asked me if I would work with her, and she's an amazing writer and an artist. She's going to happen. She, the guy at Universal Republic signed her, and it's she's 21 years old and has real talent, So it's, doing stuff like that from the ground floor. It's an exciting thing to be able to do.
You said she was...
And then I'm doing all the other stuff that I normally do, and I'm working with an artist in Northern California named Carmel, who's wonderful. I started with her writing about 3 years ago, and she's developed into a really good songwriter and singer, and keep going. Mixing this, mixing that. And I work all day, every day.
Can you talk about your concept of leadership in the studio? You can talk about a time when you were, especially with people you maybe, I'm not even talking about genres of music, but you don't have to mention names, but a time when you were, how you dealt with adversity in the studio when you were younger and didn't necessarily have your own individual voice. You weren't totally secure with your individual voice, how you overcame it, how it made you a stronger producer, engineer, audio producer.
Well, I always just forged forward. I would never accept no for an answer, and I would never let anybody beat me down. I just kept moving forward. I figure if you're a moving target, you're harder to hit. And at some point, I gained enough momentum and enough knowledge to where I knew that I could succeed. The next key element is finding the right artist, and I was really fortunate in the Sound Factory in those days to have been hooked up with all those amazing people. I mean, it just didn't stop. I mean, there was a year when I did 22 albums, and in that year, I think I had 13 number one singles. So, when you have that kind of artistry, it's pretty hard not to make it happen,
Could you give an example of a time when you wouldn't take no for an answer?
Well, probably in the early 70s when I was a struggling singer-songwriter and trying to make my way in the music business in Hollywood, the kind of rejection that you'd get was endless, and I just didn't accept it. I just went, yeah, right, and moved on. And until I found a path of least resistance. Some people get discouraged. Some people end up doing drugs and disappear, and who knows. But I just never stopped and haven't since.
You were at one time a singer-song. You.
Oh yeah, I was signed to Clive Davis as an artist in a band. I came out of San Francisco and was in a band up there, and then
What band
one
was
of the
it?
guys
What
that
band was it?
one of the guys that I worked with was Ron Elliott. Do you know who he is? He
I,
had a band called the Beau Brummels.
okay, I know Bill Elliott. I don't know Ron Elliott. Go ahead.
Ron Elliott had a band called the Beau Brummels in the '60s, which was a big American band that everybody thought was an English band. They had a bunch of hits that he wrote, and then as that band was breaking up, he asked me to, if we could put a band together. So we did, and it was with myself, Ron Elliott, a kid named Keith Barber who had a big hit called Echo Park, and a drummer named Don Francisco, and we got signed by Clive to Columbia Records. The band was called Pan, and
TAN.
yeah, and the single came out the week the single came out. It was going through the roof, and then Clive got fired.
I cannot. This is already. I mean, that is mine. I didn't know that. I had no idea you were in this.
Oh yeah, I was signed as a staff writer at April Blackwood for 3 years. Then I went to Warner Tamerlane, and then I went to the Warner Brothers conglomerate. So I had a background in songwriting and singing. I'm a guitar player, and that's how I got started.
Were you part of the folk scene? I mean, were you out there with?
Oh yeah,
with
I
McGuinn?
mean,
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I used to go see those guys play at Ciro's on Sunset in 1965. Dylan would get up and sit in and play harmonica.
Oh yeah, I mean, I even like you said you were from San Francisco. I'm trying to get it like the.
I was up there. The place to play in the city was on Broadway.
On Broadway. Yeah, the strip. Did you do the strip clubs?
No, well, they weren't strip clubs then. It was like Tom Donahue. Do you know who he is?
Absolutely. Yeah, he was the guy that.
Yeah,
did
well, he had a club on Broadway called Mothers, and that's where the Spoonful would play. That's where the Beau Brummels would play. That's where everybody would play. And Paul Revere and the Raiders, and there was all these clubs on Broadway that everybody was all rock acts at the time in the '60s, and before the Carol Doda on the piano's topless thing started.
Yeah, see, those are my posts. That's when those cats were playing 20-minute jams over the top, and they were calling out Duke Ellington tunes.
Oh yeah.
Did you? Yeah.
So then I moved back down to Hollywood in around '66, and that's where I was from that point on.
I just want to, for the record, with the Mizells, with the Blackbirds, you would go up to Fantasy Studios up in San Francisco to do that?
No, well, I went there one time, but most of those were all done at the Sound Factory.
What is the Sound Factory today?
It's still there. It's called the Sunset Sound Factory. It's on Selma.
Right. And how much activity?
But that's where we did.
Yeah,
we did all those records. I did all the James Taylor records there. I did the first, 6 Linda Ronstadt records there. I did, 3 Neil Diamond records there. I did all the Donalds records there, and all the Blackbirds, both the 2 albums that were hits. I did at the Sound Factory. Andrew Gold, I did there. The Four Seasons, I did there. I can't think of them all, but they were all done at the Sound Factory in Hollywood.
Did you work with the section on their albums?
Oh yeah.
Can you talk about that? Yeah. Those albums have been a catharsis.
Oh, did I cut their stuff? You mean? No, yeah. I worked with the section as musicians. No, I never did any of their records.
You never did any of the records, but you just did it.
No.
What if when you look at the section, or you look at Carl Radel and Tut, Tut to me is like an inspiration. The guy was like, basically discounted on a tryout, and then he got the gig with Elvis. But it's like, if you were going to talk to cats, stepping back from it, what makes a great section?
Well, usually, historically speaking, a drummer and a bass player that have played together for a long time is what usually makes a great rhythm section. So when John Guerin was playing with, Wilton Felder,
mm-hmm.
that was like, they'd played together a million times. Or when Russ was playing with Lee, they'd played together a million times. That's usually what creates a great feeling rhythm section, the bass player and the drummer.
But I guess here's the question: what with the propensity of, I mean, let's face it, Russ was in a band. By the way, did you know Lee when he was in Wolfgang in that band?
No.
You never crossed paths with him. Do you remember when was the first time you actually met those cats? Was it in the Sound Factory?
Yeah. Yeah, way back, probably 1972.
I guess the better question is, those cats had a lot of opportunity to feel together. The propensity of the sessions they had, they'd come in before the sun came up, they'd leave when the sun went down. If you're talking to younger cats who don't have the ability to play on the bandstand as much, and they can't get in the studio, how can you still develop that feel?
They do it. I use a drummer all the time, Victor Andrizzo, who plays with the bass player, and they must do 10 sessions a week. And, they play in Colby Colet's records, or, probably 70% of every hit record that came out of Hollywood in the last 2 years. They play together all the time. They're both in their middle 40s, and they're both amazing musicians, and they just have that feel.
It's interesting stuff. Final thought for you, if you could just probably never worked with the cat, but did you ever get off on Mose Allison? He passed away.
Yeah, and it's funny you should mention that, because Mose wrote Seventh Son.
Oh yeah.
And it was always one of my favorite songs, and I went and saw him at the Bakery about 4 years ago. The guy was still amazing. The Bakery's a jazz club over in Venice.
Sure. Well, is the Bakery's that's a jazz club where?
Over in near Venice on Venice Boulevard, and that old what do you call it? That big complex there that was a bakery or something, part of a bakery, and the club, the Bakery, is in that complex.
I was going to say
jazz club.
Yeah, because the Baked Potato was a whole. Did you ever play the Baked Potato?
Oh no, the Baked Potato. I've been there a million times. I know Don Randy for years.
That was also where Joni wound up finding the L.A. Express. You must have worked with all those guys.
Well, the L.A. Express was John Guerin, and that's how John got hooked up with. John played drums on Summer Breeze.
Yeah, John Guerin was playing like modal jazz with Roger Kellaway too. I mean, the guy was fierce,
brilliant.
Yeah, no, I mean, he was a troubled cat though. He didn't have it easy though.
Yeah, I know. I worked with him a lot. Believe me, he was on a lot of sessions of Louis Shelton's.
I mean, just for the record, I was born in 1978, so I mean, this to me is like a cathartic kind of thing, and it's the opportunity to talk to people who were making real music made by real musicians. And I know that you got other things to do, Val, but I really would like to do part 2 with you, man. I feel like we're just getting started here.
All right, well, let's talk about that. I'm not opposed to that.
Okay. All right, man. Much love.
All right, man.
Much love to you, man. Good to hear you.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Later on.
Bye.
Yep. It's a legendary producer and engineer, Val Garay. Was able to connect with him via new media, and the Sound Factory. What else do you want? And what else can you say? I mean, the guy was literally engineering the heaviest sessions at the heaviest time in music in our history. We'll be back with Mike Mainieri at the top of the hour. For now, we'll rejoin the Jim Parisi Show.